like to introduce Jake Adler. He's a stat programmer at PROMETRIKA. He'll talk about optimizing TLF Generation.
Thank you. Yeah, so like you said, I'm Jake Adler, and my partner is Asir. Unfortunately, couldn't be here today. He's expecting his third child any hour now, to be honest. So, but the topic is optimizing TLF generation, titles and footnotes, applying a new idea to a basic approach. So title footnote updates can take a lot of time, especially if there are many programs that need the updating. And so footnotes basically, can vary in updates as maybe changing one word, or you might have to change the entire footnote. And so what we're going to use is Visual Basics for applications in Excel, which allows for macros to be created, and we could use that macro to then take text from a Word document and export it to an Excel sheet, which then we'll read into SAS. So basically, what is the current method versus this newer method? So the current method that we currently use is we look at a mock TLF, and then we get the footnotes and the titles from there, and we in our proc report we write in title 1, and then we write, say, the title, and then footnote 1, footnote 2, based on how many footnotes there are. And the new method, what we'll do is we'll run the mock TLFs through this Vba Code, and after that, we'll then create a SAS macro that reads in the spreadsheet that the Vba Code produces. And then we could then create macro variables for titles and footnotes that we could then read into SAS for the proc report. So what are the goals? The goals is to create a table listing figure shell standard for this macro to work. And then we write that Excel VBA macro to read in those shells. Then we read a macro output into SAS and create those macro variables with the titles and footnotes. And then we'll have to have a validation of this method. So table listing figure shell formatting. So every title, we need a line break, and a line break is basically done with Shift Enter, and it creates this mark right here. And Shift Enter basically allows this table 1 subject disposition, all subjects, to be concatenated into one paragraph. This one paragraph we could then read in using the VBA macro into one line that we create for a macro as the title. And you could look at these paragraph markers in Word through this paragraph marker symbol that you have in Word in the paragraphs under the Home tab. So line break for footnotes. So line break for footnotes is a little more different. So for footnotes, or you can have up to 10 lines when you're creating a proc report for footnotes, and in titles as well, but you're really never going to go over 10 titles but for footnotes. And basically, it's really useful because with those line breaks, it allows for that concatenation. So you'll only have essentially, with all the concatenating, one long footnote. And another thing that's important with footnotes is, so on the left is an example of a shell that has the table contents connected to the footnotes, while on the right, the table contents are disconnected from the footnotes right here, so it's in a separate table. We want it all to be in one table, so we could essentially remove the unwanted material, which is the contents that are for it, so we could only have the footnotes and the title. So now we have, what is this, a section break. So the section break is broken up across each page. So we have table 2, section break, table 3. This allows for the VBA code to know, so we know how to switch between each section. So we're going to continuously run a loop with the macro, and it'll know section 1 is table 2, and section 2 is table 3. So for repeat tables, if the footnote is the same as the previous TLF, then we could have a table with 2 rows under it, under the table title, but the contents aren't necessary. And the same would apply for, say, if it was the same table with contents but different footnote, you would just do the title difference and as well as the footnote difference. So here's the VBA code. I'm just going to run through some of the important parts, and the entire code is within the paper. But basically, the goal of the VBA code is to output the Excel file with column 1 being the titles and column 2 being footnotes. So first, we want to read in the shells. So we just read in the shells and we type in where the shell location, and then we hit OK. And basically, the macro runs, and what it's doing is we loop through each section, like I said before, with the section break, and it takes out all the unnecessary rows. So basically, it goes from here where we have table 2, all the contents and the footnotes, and now we have table 2 with just the footnotes. So the content was removed. So the last 2 lines we have here is footnotes and then our program file name. And then we output that last that first line in that paragraph will become the footnote, become a footnote observation in the Excel sheet that we're outputting. In this part, we're going to be looking for the table contents. So basically, or for the title contents. So what we're looking here is the first instance that we see the word table, figure, or listing. We will then output that entire paragraph with all the line breaks into column 1, which will be an observation for the titles. And this part of the code then looks for those line breaks and then replaces it with a \line, which we could then read to output the RTF, so we could actually see the line breaks in the RTF. Because in the Excel, when it is output, it outputs as a special character, so we just replace that special character with what we could use in SAS. And here's an example of what the output would look like. So right here we have table 1, \line, subject disposition, \line, all subjects, and then the footnote. And then we have here for row 2, the same thing with all the footnotes concatenated together with the \line. And I just really wanted to go through a quick demo on how this is actually done. Really quick. So here's the code right here, and I can see where it's coming from. So I'm just going to run it, and then the window will pop up, and we enter it. So no quotes are needed. Colon / shell. We'll click OK. So now it opens up this, and see how it strips out all the contents. It goes through it and only leaves the footnotes. So then it goes through every one, and then as that's happening, it's outputting to the title footnote macro sheet that we're going to then be able to read in the SAS. So as you can see here, oops, sorry. So this is the same thing that I just showed on the screen before. Just the titles and the footnotes all in column A is the titles, and in column B is the footnotes. So then go back to this. Okay, so now that we have that sheet, we need to import the SAS. So what we're going to do is just create a SAS macro that we could then basically take in that Excel sheet and then create these macro variables, title 1 and footnote 1. And this will all be depending on which one we are actually working on. So now we read in the CSV file that we created from that program, and we can compress out all the special characters over here. And then what we could do is then create a macro variable for the titles and the footnotes, all depending on which table we're working on. So here's an example of what the original Excel would look like. So we have these special characters that just aren't necessary. So we just compress that out. So now we have the var1, which is the title, the var2, which is the footnotes, and the var3, which is what table we're working on, or listing or figure. And then this is just an example of when we're creating a pocket report of the new method versus the current method. So we have title 1, macro variable under title 3, and then we have footnote 1 with the macro variable footnote 1. And then as you see on the right side, the current method is writing in each one, table 2, demographics based on characteristics, safety, analysis, population, the same for the footnotes. And as you can see, this method does appear to be much more easier to implement and also could result in less human error. So here's an example of the output as an RTF. So I just wanted to show this to see how there is no difference. This is just a side-by-side comparison of the new method versus the current method with the paragraph markers on. So titles right here, the only difference between the titles and the footnotes, content's all the same, is that line break right here. So we have line break, and then line break, but not on the right side. But it's just, if you take off these paragraph markers, it's the exact same output. So now we need a validation method. So we want to make sure that when the changes are made within the shells, they are reflected also in the spreadsheet as well, every time the change is made. So we have a validation method for this to use the compare feature in Apache Subversion, SVN. And this feature basically produces a side-by-side comparison between the Excel versions, and it highlights the changes between a base copy, which is the one that we're currently working on, or a base copy, which is the one we're working on, and then a working copy. So here is the older version right here, where it has footnote 1, footnote 2, and then footnote 3, and then this line just got changed, so now footnote 3 is removed and we added a footnote 5. And then here we removed from the title for table 3, add initial diagnosis, so that's no longer here, and it shows that here. And this is a nice validation method, because even if there is an inserted table, listing, or figure, it will account for that, and it'll know that what the old one was, so it won't think of that as a new change. And then, so conclusions. So having the ability to programmatically get titles and footnotes will greatly decrease the time it takes to make TLF updates. It will also reduce the possible error of inputting manually. And through this paper, we realized how good VBA is and how it could be applied to many other tasks. So any questions? Thank you.
Nice, any question?
What is the main use of this application? Who's intended?
Who's their target audience?
I think mostly for programmers, I'd say. So the big challenge is communicating and trying to get statisticians on board with working with the programmers to actually create a standard shell to actually work with this macro, or have their own standard shell that we could use a macro to generate output like this. But it mostly saves time for the programmers because of how many updates and the footnotes are usually.
Go ahead.
Sometimes the footnotes can contain special characters. Would your method will work for this?
Yeah, so that is an issue I've actually come across as special characters. So like, for example, that backslash line was a special character. I haven't tested it with really other special characters, but like the worst case scenario is you could always manually put in the table titles and footnotes if there is a special character.
So one question I have, between the VB editor, can't we just auto script everything?
Like within SAS?
You can do it with VB. So just open the VB editor and run. You can make a script, just make it automate.
Mm-hmm.
So the VB has that. But that's mostly done. Any more questions, guys? Anyone? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so that's just done. So the backslash line, you include that, and then for indentations, it'll just read in the spaces. So if you put in the spaces, it'll just read that in as well.
Okay, we still have time for more questions. Okay, I take silence as no. Thank you. Oh, okay. Yeah, you can take now.
I was just going to ask on statisticians, how much difficulty did you have in somewhat ordinary statisticians to apply?
We haven't yet, unfortunately. Yeah. I know, that is going to be the biggest issue for sure.
Okay, cool.
But yeah, does anybody else have any like, what do you guys do say for this type of thing? You have your own automation to do something like this. So what kind of question?
So we have that system built in.
Yeah, I was talking.
Your friend can tell you.
Yeah.
Because we developed it. So. Right, yeah. Okay, guys. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff.
Yep.